it is shrunk. Therefore, and moreover, these studies and practices we have to look into, because it has tremendous impact in the upbringing or in the human being to higher levels. Their faith practices, everything has a tremendous influence. So it's in this context we are initiating this discussion, and may I invite Sir to make or this theme presented. I invite this Sir to make this theme presented.
Thank you, Professor Gopinathji, for conceiving this very significant theme for our deliberation. Hinduism is acclaimed as Sanatana Dharma, which means it has some fundamental ideas and ideals, sublime institutions, which are beneficial to the entire humankind, beneficial in the past, beneficial in the present, and also beneficial in future.
Vimal, please don't make a presentation. Withdraw that. Advocate,
Hello?
that presentation.
Yes.
Please, that you have pressed the presentation button. Please rectify it. Please. Yeah.
Very kindly ask everyone to go to mute themselves, except the speaker. Kindly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I start?
Kindly
Please.
ask.
Should I speak?
Please mute the mic. Please mute the mic.
Should I speak? Hello?
Yes. Are you hearing
Please
now?
start. Please proceed.
Okay.
Am I audible to all? Am I audible?
Yes.
Achha. So, I was saying that when we regard Hinduism as Sanatana Dharma, it means that it has relevance in the past, in the present, and in the future as well. That's because it has some such salient ideas and ideals, some such noble institutions, some such practices which are of a perennial value. But then, when we come to the actual functioning of a Hindu mode of thinking and way of living, we find that these sublime ideas have got some sort of distortion because of the course of history, and also some external factors. They got mutilated, and therefore they lost their value, which they had when they were initially founded. So there are many such institutions in Hinduism which got distorted, and Varna Vyavastha is one of them. It is therefore our responsibility as a knowledgeable member of the Hindu society to see to it as to what has gone wrong, where and how these aberrations have taken place, and also how to rectify them. Mere visiting the past is not enough. Mere diagnosis of this sort of ailment is not enough. We have to also see to it that in future, how we can do away with all those distortions which have vitiated Hindu society. Hindu society, to my mind, has enough vitality to see to it that these ailments are properly diagnosed and cured. So Varna Vyavastha, therefore, is one such institution which was very much helpful once upon a time, but later on in the course of history got distorted as a caste system, and now it is vitiating Hindu society in the form of casteism. This casteism has become cancerous for Hindu society. And therefore, we have to see as to how there has been this gradual degeneration and distortion. Varna Vyavastha was propounded as a mode of social organization and harmonious functioning of different social organs, individuals, institutions, and practices. The ideal that was put forth for Varna Vyavastha was an organic whole model. A society should be structured in the form of a living, constantly growing, healthy organism. And therefore, the analogy given in the Rig Veda in the form of a Purusha having different organs, well, that organism was in fact valuable at that time when it was formulated. It is still valuable, provided it is properly restructured in the light of present day conditions and requirements. In an organism, you have a unity in multiplicity. There is one organic whole having multiple organs, and there is multiplicity situated in unity. The multiplicity is not scattered one, but it is all located, and so there is at once both centrifugal and centripetal arrangement in a social organization. Well, this was the motive or directive force in formulation of Varna Vyavastha. In this, of course, we had a division in the form of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. This was an existential, functional hierarchy, not a valuational hierarchy. It is not that the organ which is at the top is more valuable than the organ at the bottom. In fact, on the contrary, the organ on the bottom, that is the legs, are more, I should say, valuable in the sense that they uphold the entire organism. The entire organism is standing on our foot only. So you cannot downgrade the role of feet. They are very important. In fact, it is the feet which carry the entire burden of the organism. And therefore, we call them as Mahattara, most important, highest. Though organically you can say that our mind is the highest, but in fact you can make this analogy topsy-turvy and can say that it is the legs and the feet which are the most valuable part of our body. And therefore, this sort of model of a living, thriving organism wherein there is perfect coordination among all the organs, and whereas there is some sort of coexistence, cooperation, mutual caring and sharing. Well, this is the model of social organization which was conceived by our rishis and sages and seers. In fact, it is not that different organs are functioning at variance. They coexist and they cooperate. And therefore, this should have been the ideal. So it is this idea which drove the ancient sages and seers to formulate our Varna Vyavastha, fourfold Varna Vyavastha. And this worked well in the past. Now, this
situation. Therefore, why Ambedkar, etc., said within Hindu society, Hindu religious order, Dalits or lower caste will not get justice because it is systemic. This problem is systemic. It is part of the system. The whole system knowingly or unknowingly promote, indirectly, invisibly, unconsciously sustain this system. Therefore, whether these are or not, so the ensuing discussions, the presentations, we will go into such points. Thank you, Professor Bhatt, sir. Thank you. May I invite Dr. Jyotindra Daveji to make his presentation. We all are familiar with Daveji. He is the director of Swaminarayan Research Institute. He is very much associated with that great movement, and he is known widely in India, especially among the philosophy fraternity. And he is a renowned scholar, very insightful scholar. I invite Professor Daveji to make his presentation in 15 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I am so thankful, to Shangiri Ashram and Gopinathji Pillai and Professor Bhatt, Professor Gautam Patel. They are all friend, philosopher, guide for me for day-to-day work as well as for my academic study. They are very, very helpful to me. After listening to Professor Bhatt's, statement, I am really, in two minds, what should we do to remove, the implications and especially the negative implications of the caste system or Jativada in India. There is a very well-known shloka of Bhavabhuti in Uttar Ram Charita, which said, Ye naam kechidih pratantya avagnam jhananti te kimapi tanpati naishayatnah utpatsate asti mamakopi samana dharma kalo yam niravatihi vipulach prithvi. My statement, I do not know, whether this galaxy of scholars will accept or not. But let me tell, 2 or 3 very important things which, were indicated by Professor Bhatt. Professor Bhatt just now suggested that, we should, totally remove the caste system or Jativada and that would help. I am reminded here of statement by Swami Vivekananda in his book My India, the Indian Eternal, published from Calcutta, latest edition 1993. Let's see what he says. According to him, no religion on earth preaches the dignity of humanity in such a lofty strain as Hinduism, and yet no religion on earth treads upon the necks of the poor and low in such a fashion as in Hinduism. So there are two extremes. On one extreme, he says, it is at the highest level. On the other, he states that it is at such a low level. And that is based, because of the jati system. But we have to understand that there is basic difference between Varna and Jati. And about these, not only our great Indian scholars have written a lot of articles, but there are Western scholars like professor from Chicago University, Professor Dumont Lewis, who writes in his work, The Caste System and Its Implication, which was published from the University of Chicago. He says, even Indologists sometimes confuse between the two terms of Varna and Jati. Varna and Jati are not identical. They are not pariyaya. They are different, and we have to understand, as Professor Bhatt also suggested, that we did not have the caste system in the early periods of India, in the Rigvedic period, in the Upanishadic period. And he very correctly, he from the Rigved 10th Mandal, he, gave the very famous slok, how the four Varnas, were brought. Brahmano asya mukam asit bahu, Rajanya krita udurta jasya yadvaishya, padbyam shudro ajayata. And he explained very well that, those people who were teaching, they were Brahmins, but before teach, they had to understand, they have to study. And they were, the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas or the warrior caste, they had to look after the defense of the society and the country. And they, the whole society was on the thighs of the Vaishya. And the Shudras, were at the foundation. And friends, here I am reminded of a, very well-known poet of Hindi literature, Maithili Sharan Gupta, who considers Shudra to be the brothers of Ganga. Ganga also, was born from the feet of Vishnu, and the Shudras are also, from the feet. He says, "Utpanna ho tum Prabhu pado se, jo sabhi ko jyey hai, tum ho sahodar sursari ke, charitra jiske jyey hai." You are like that. But that kind of great, concept and that kind of, understanding was not among all. Might be, among the people like Maithili Sharan Gupta, and now we have these things. But we have to understand, what was the reason and how, the Varna was created, how the Jati was created, and how Jati or the caste system became so powerful by the time of Manusmriti that, the people who were from the lower caste really felt, out of the society. As Bhatt Sahib said, very correctly, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is very clearly mentioned, Chatur Varna Maya Srushtam Guna Karma Vibhagshaha. I have created according to Guna and Karma. And friends, Guna and Karma can go on changing. And Guna and Karma, can take from a Shudra to Brahman. And even a Brahman may become, at the lowest. And that was accepted in the early periods. I hope most of you must have, heard the name of the Upanishads, must have studied Upanishads, and among the ancient Upanishads, Ishakena, Kata, Prashna, Munda, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Aitareya, Chandogya, there is a Chandogya Upanishad, and there is a story of Satyakam Jawal. Satyakam Jawal goes for his admission to the ashrama. Hari Rishi says, what is your name? What is the name of your father? What is your family? What they say, what is your gotra and kula? And look, the answer he gave. And the answer the teacher accepted. If we give that kind of answer, even today when our admission is there in the school, what would the result? I cannot say. But he said that my mother told me that she was serving many people, almost like maid servant, and she came in contact with somebody. Due to that, I was born. And the teacher accepts him. Can you say, there was that jati system? Can you say that there was, this kind of caste system at that time? And not only he was accepted as a student, he became an acharya, according to Chandogya Upanishad. So friends, we had that great heritage with us, but from the time of Manusmriti onwards, as correctly explained by Professor Bhatt, the Varna became Jati. And the rules and regulations, right from the Garbhadan to the study and others, were different from different people, for different castes. And during the medieval period, we suffered a lot. And friends, just now we heard Professor Bhatt saying that, we should remove this entire, Jativad, this caste system. We should have something like, class system. But I want, to mention one of the latest and very important books. And I hope those of you who have the time, please read it. It is the book with the title Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. It is written by Isabel Wilkerson. And friends, whatever we say about, the defects and drawbacks of caste system, that is also there in the class of USA and European systems. And the way she has written this book, it brings to the notice that the human nature is such that for some reason, either, to the environment or to the study, we get the idea that I am superior to XYZ. And we consider that, and there are all the elements that, enhance, our concept. So when Professor Bhatt says that we should remove it, yes, we should, but it will take such a huge and long time that we must accept that till that time, we will have to face the problem. This, writer Isabel Wilkerson, what she says, I would, like to point out. As we go about our daily lives, caste is a wordless person in the theater with a flashlight cast down on the aisles, guiding you to your assigned seat without knowing, without questioning what you should do. See, this is the condition of USA. We must have, gone through what has happened, in Washington recently after, Trump's supporters or whosoever they were, how did they behave? And how they are behaving even today with the black people. And Varna also means color. If we have that kind of concept in our mind, either, inherited or imposed upon us, then I think we have that problem. And unless and until, we have the great teacher like Harith, we have a great teacher who can accept us as our own without asking, all these questions, irritating each and every one. I don't think, we can progress in removing the drawbacks of Varna or Jati system. And for that Varna and Jati system, all our great, as Narayan Muni said, and I am also giving the examples of, the faith to which I belong, Swaminarayan faith. There is a latest work written, Satsanga Diksha Granth, in which it is clearly said that class and caste, are not acceptable. A person may be of any class, any caste, please accept him as your brother. But friends, to put it into your day-to-day life, I have no answer. Utpatsate mama kopi samara dharma. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jyotindra Daviji, for your very brilliant but short presentation. You sought to substantiate that during the Vedic period, there was no. It is true that it is a commonly accepted fact that in the Vedic period, in my language, I will say that during that Atmajnana period, that Jnana Marga was in, when it was in existence, the great during because there had been, because in all the societies, there should be people who would pursue very different lines, but the dominant ambience and perspective set by the great rishis contributed for such an dharma-centered way of life and thought system. It was there, but after that it was vitiated. These are something taken for granted by the scholars and all. But beyond that, because our limitations, etc., even then, out of my anxiety and my concern, I am again putting for, despite all this, how at a practical existential level we can make it dent into this scenario. Apparently, the caste system is very much depreciated. It's a peripheral reflections because of effect laws and etc. No, but it's a cultural dimension. The metaphysical dimension still persists. So it is to be looked into and addressed thoroughly. Thank you very much. So, with Vimal Vadan's permission, may I request Professor Srigala Nair, because she has to join the meeting. Advocate Vimal Vadan, may I invite Srigala Nair?
No problem.
Okay,
Carry on.
So, request Professor Srigala Nair your presentation, and Srigala Nair is here among all of us. She needs no further introduction. She is a professor in Kaladi Shankaracharya University. Earlier, she was a professor in Nalanda University, and in several capacities, she is contributing her service to the enrichment of this philosophy, its course. Let me invite Professor Srigala Nair to make her presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, and pranams to Professor Bhatt and all senior professors gatherings here. It was an unexpected and early call, so I was just taken aback. Well, now I'm ready. I shall be as quick as possible as usual. How I've titled my presentation is Objectification in Caste and Gender. So I'm trying to juxtapose these two issues that we have, particularly in modern India, the caste and gender, how they interact, and what are the common issues raised by the caste and gender. I shall try to avoid going into the past and the history, because this has been spoken by Professor Bhatt and Professor Dave. So within the given time, I would like to do something fruitful. Let me not dig the past, trying to understand what Varna originally was meant. Anyway, all that has been covered wonderfully by the two senior professors. I'm with Austin, J.L. Austin, who has wonderfully claimed that a meaning of the term is what it currently represents in the society, how it has been currently used. Today by caste, we mean an endogamous hereditary group bearing a common name, adhering to a set of common customs, especially regarding purity, meals, and marriages. Ideologically, the caste are the social frame within which karma receives the aura of dharma. And we know dharma is a moksha marga, and that is the religious significance of the caste system. All that is fine. But as Professor Gopinath was repeatedly expressing his concern, all that has been fine, but these norms, seem to be having an aura of necessity, and this strict normativity that seem attached to these principles seem to be the problem when they get transmitted to the society, because those who have been applying these norms to the society seem to forget that society is a change flowing contextual entity, and therefore Realizing the contingent nature of these norms when they get applied in the pragmatic concept and at the pragmatic level, at the level of praxis, therefore, creative interpretations and imaginations should have been welcomed. But what has happened was quite contrary. There was great resistance to have interpretative dialogues and discourses on caste system, or the role of the gender, and at this adherence to strict normativity, an obsession seen with Hinduism since Mimamsakas, particularly among those at the higher ladder of the Hindu class stratification, made the religion a bit stagnant. I want to employ the norm of purity here to engage a discussion on normativity in order to show you how this normativity has done harm to the tradition. Let me employ this concept called purity. Purity is an ideological category used by the upper caste Hindus to justify exclusions and maintain their social privileges, where purity carries layers of meaning. It could be, just hygiene to the ritual purity. Hygiene is a physical entity and the physical experiential factor, while ritual purity is a religious term. Now, traditional Hindus maintained that the ritual impurity and untouchability inherent in the lower caste belong to the same class of impurity temporarily associated with the mourners or the menstruating women. With this difference that for the former class it is permanent, while for the latter it is only temporary. Interestingly, the public health discourse in India, what has happened during the colonial and the post-colonial time is that there was this discourse on hygiene, as part of the health discourses, and is known to have been a caste discourse. Hygiene rules were in fact reinterpreted caste rules. I mean, this factor is most visible in North and not much in South. They were reinterpreted in caste rules, with the modern assimilating and authoring new ideas on health in their own terms. And this not only, you can see this, if you open your eyes, you can see this very much visible even today in the North. This not only determined ideas on health, but also health practices with assigned roles and functions for the low caste and women. Now, interestingly, I have been trying to tell you that how there was this resistance with regard to normativity. This resistance has caused. Hello? Please, Daveji and Vimalji, please put out your lower strata of women, particularly the scheduled castes, the tribes, the prehistoric period, all of them have been having these two exercises parallelly. There is a fine conjunction of production and reproduction with them. And I'm going to tell you the metaphysical benefits of handling these two together. Going by the existing archaeological studies, there are indications that in prehistoric culture, women's role in production and reproduction was considered as coherent and valuable. Now I'm trying to draw you the two contrast pictures of one belonging to the upper class, the women belonging to the upper class, and the other women belonging to the lower strata. The former, the productive and the reproductive functions are depicted as disjunctive. They are trained theoretically to view these two are disjunctive. That is, in very near future, Nair women were never allowed to get into jobs because as belong to the higher caste, they were not supposed to be participant in the economically productive exercises. Now, the recent studies of cave paintings reveal that women during the hunting period, they were involved in hunting and fishing, and along with the rest of the males, thus combining their roles as mothers and producers. There were pictures of they carrying the fishing net and the animals, the killed animals, and so forth. So the role of women in the economy was thus equal, if not more, to that of men. Also, modern anthropological data says or speaks at length about this interdependence of the male and the female. So the whole suggestion is that the relative status of men and women can at the most at that time be characterized separate but equal. Men were separate, women were separate, but their status was equal. What I want to highlight here is the enhanced importance attached to the role of women as engaged in economically productive exercise on one, and also the reproductive functions. And friends, the former I would call it as empirical and the latter as metaphysical. Why metaphysical? Because the reproductive exercises, when woman performs the reproductive exercises, she is partaking with the function of the, she is participant of the reproductive exercises which nature herself does. That is why woman is always represented as a mirror of nature. Now, the paintings of the prehistoric life portrayed women in the act of childbirth as a figure of mother goddess. So this life-giving mother appeared to have power over life and death. That was a conception. So it has also been argued that the first form of religious expression for men and women is the psychological bond between mother and child. So from from the metaphysical level, you come down to the human endeavor where you are trying to have the religion. And the first religion that was possible was a psychological bond between the mother and the child. Mind you, this metaphysical act was denied for the upper caste woman. Of course, she is also producing, but then there is a theoretical exegesis that is put into her that she is someone who, what is that lack? The lack of masculinity. And this lack of masculinity forces her to desire for a son. And once she produces the son, she changes the gender. And she also gets shifted to the masculine. And you have a series of examples of, Rajmata. What happens when a mother becomes powerful as mother of a son? So was women credited with a metaphysical self in the mainstream Hindu religion is something that I'm trying to raise over and above a cultural self. For instance, take the instance of Ram. Ram, when he was called upon to discard the country to preserve the word of Raja Dasharath, he says, why, father, I am willing to discard even my mother, even Sita for you. Now, apart from objectifying Sita, what I'm trying to highlight is the fact that here Ram is clearly ascending a moral or metaphysical pedestal for which he has been hailed. But this climbed to a metaphysical ladder has been preserved only for a man. Think of Sita doing the same. Think of the reverse. Can you imagine that? Can you even imagine saying the same? No, she can't, for she is only a tool to facilitate the spiritual ascendance of the male. What I'm trying to highlight is that this I have represented in several forums. Do women were given, of course, you have enough, and don't stop me or shut my mouth trying to say that this text say that there is no gender bar, this text said there is no gender bar. All that is fine. All that is fine with metaphysics. The question is what has been happening at the empirical level. At the empirical level, she is only a tool to facilitate the spiritual ascendance of Lord Ram. Now let me get back to the lower strata. Some scholars have characterized the hunting gathering as a kind of matristic one in which women were not subjected to the authority of men nor of other women. There would be little need in such society for the sexual control of women by men. Evidence from the Harappan civilization, well, I leave that Harappan civilization. Let me get back to what is happening to the lower strata of the society. So what I'm trying to hit it is, as we climb down the ladder of caste hierarchy, there is the celebration of the female body, its fertility and sexuality. Let me do a bit of Indian psychoanalysis. It is evident, a lot has been written on Indian psychoanalysis. It is evident that for a subaltern woman, there is no compulsion. There is no, this desire for a son, this desire for a son, which is seen in the upper caste, which has been a byproduct of her realization that there is a basic lack in her, is not in the subaltern. In the upper caste women, this desire for a son comes from the basic lack of masculine, which they hope to overcome by giving birth to a son. Once this happens, as I've already told you, that there is a gender shift. the mother becomes a masculine gender and she begins to handle power and place constant control over her son. And, I can speak at length, but then I restrict. And there is power plays in families or in kingdoms. Note that gender is not just about the male or the female. Gender is an analytic formulation about an individual or a certain class of people as masculine or feminine within the context of certain existing power relationship. And they also abhorred giving birth to a girl child, which is still prevalent, particularly in the north. And the neglect and the discrimination the child experienced as a girl child are partially been credited to her imagination and the rest to the religious norms. I'm trying to wind up. So today the situation is very complex. As I've said, it is the issue is so very intricate, as I have cited the example of Andhra Pradesh, where the higher caste women has been attacked by the Dalit boys, and feminists stand divided as justice lie with who? Who is the other actually? Today's situation is very, very complex in India. The higher caste women who participate in the productive and the reproductive activities often undergo self-conflicts. If I don't speak, there will not be anybody who will speak on this. There is a lot of self-conflicts that she undergoes. Fear of violating the norms, because she knows Smriti, she knows the do's and the don'ts. But nevertheless, she has entered into the productive or the labor field. And the worst, she will have to defend herself being accused by the immediate community. The community will always say that, see, you have missed out this. You have gone against the tradition. You have gone against this, that. So there is a basic error involved. As I have said, there is, the labor, the productive and the reproductive have been placed in the Smritis as disjunctive. Smarta Vichara, I'm reminded of the Smarta Vichara of that Nambudiri woman during the last century. It is not in the great past in the history, it is in recent history that the Smarta Vichara has taken place. In fact, the Smarta Vichara has been happening within every woman continuously these days, particularly among the upper caste women. So now, what of the women of the lower strata? Is their situation better? They too participate in the productive and reproductive exercises, as we know. But they enjoy relative freedom because at least the Smritis don't intervene there. But they enjoy relative freedom from the strictures of the Smritis. But the glow of the metaphysical self, earlier I was trying to tell you that there was this metaphysical activity as they reproduce, they feel that they are participating in the metaphysical act of the nature. That glow has dimmed down. The glow of the metaphysical self is low, since myths do not nourish human life anymore. Nourishing of the human life is a job now taken up by science. Myths have no role whatsoever. To sum up, my appeal is to recredit the metaphysical self to these two others, be it the scheduled caste or the women. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Sheila M. Nair, because you made a very illuminating presentation, and the focusing on the caste and gender nexus. You have presented highlighting the stray instances in Indian cultural history, the pathetic situation of lower caste women. Same time, the oppression out to high caste women. So I find that there is a overlapping of different cultures and viewpoints, customs, traditions. Therefore, we don't have a set standard. We don't have a set yardstick or standard to say or measure this is right or this is wrong. It is what is most intriguing in Indian scenario, because you very pertinently said this normativity, adherence to this normativity, especially in lower caste women, find that purity, impurity, hygiene, in the context of all these things, that it binds these women folk to very unethical and very suppressive situation. But there also, these are all being substantiated in the name of belief systems. We find to each and every such practices there is a solid good or bad, right or wrong, nobody questions, nobody knows. To each and every act, in all these respects, there is a solid localized belief systems or custom that is subject to these practices. Therefore, while we say all these things, we say this is bad, this is not to be done, this is to change. What we lack is a common, comprehensive, basic perspective. Because in order to measure anything, even in science and in nature, everywhere, we have certain basic norms or principles to reference points we have. But in Indian scenario, in different cultures, subcultures, regions, everything is complicated, complex, localized, everything is interpolated. Therefore, from your presentation, we understand that we have to have a certain, because at least in this modern time, we are all rather exposed to knowledge, different cultures, what are going on in different localized places in India, the pathetic situation. Therefore, the scholars like you or others have to have certain basic in-depth studies so as to bring out certain common, at least to begin with, certain common parameters to say this is right, this is not right, based on some rational within the within religion or within our spirituality. We should have a rational approach, a common approach. Otherwise, all these maladies will go on increasing. So your presentation was so highly illuminating because it gave us different viewpoints to ponder or to look at the things in a very different way. Thank you, Professor Shigala and Marasri. So we will have a discussion after all these presentations. We will have one session. So let me invite Advocate Vimal Vadan to make his presentation. Please confine to 15 minutes. Otherwise, we will run short of time. Okay, well, so you know that Advocate Vimal Vadan is the Supreme Court advocate. Moreover, in the last seminar conference also, I introduced him. He's totally these days involved in interpreting. Because every day, as I told you earlier, I get a message or a WhatsApp. He interpret each shloka of Rigveda. He started with, I think that you have started with Rigveda. Every day, in a very, not only beautiful, taking into account the present scenario, social, global scenario, he interprets each shloka of Veda, Rigveda, and he has a large number of students who learn from him. Therefore, he is involved in such an yajna or a mission to promote our Vedic wisdom. It's highly welcoming. Thank you, Vimal Vadan. Please make your presentation, please.
Yes. With the kind permission of Honorable Bhattji, Daveji, and Gopinathji, I am just focusing now on the present day picture of Varna system, that is caste system, which you say. But I feel that this Varna system is not rightly translated as a caste system. Caste is something else. Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, Sarva Manava Ek Jat. All human beings are one caste. Because we are born in an equal manner, in an equal way. So we are one yoni, we are one caste. Then people refer to 4 words in the name of caste: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Now, if we just have a little knowledge of Vedas, why I am saying little knowledge? Just imagine, just pose a simple question. When this universe was created, when human beings were born, whether God classified them into Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, or Shudras? No, not at all. God gave birth to human beings only. Rather, this men and women, they were also not treated as different castes. They belong to one caste, that is human beings. Animals have their respective castes. Horse is one caste, cows are one caste, elephant is one caste, birds also have different castes. But human beings are one caste, one jati, Manav jati. But why these four words have been misinterpreted? That is, I think, because of the medieval foreign invasions, Mughal invasions and Christians invasions. These words were misinterpreted, or the society, in order to protect itself from the clutches of the invaders, they better felt it, necessitated it to classify themselves in these castes. I don't know what is the reason. But the Rig Veda has one particular sukta that is called Purush Sukta, in which there is mention of these four words. But just try to grasp how these four words were used. What was the purpose of these four words? So, to understand that purpose, we must have a glimpse, just a glimpse of Purush Sukta in 2 or 3 minutes. Rig Veda Mandal 10 and Sukta 90 is called Purush Sukta. Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha Sahasraksha Sahasrapata. The cosmic soul of the universe, that is God, is personified having thousands of heads, thousands of eyes, and thousands of feet. Having pervaded this universe, God comprehended the universe of 10 constituents, Panchabhutas, Saha Bhumim Vishwataha Vritva Atitishtata Dashangulam. Then this Purush Sukta continues to define and elaborate the powers of God, the existence of God. It says that whatever universe you are visualizing, whatever universe you are seeing, is only 1/4 of the God's power. 3/4 of the divine power encompasses the sovereignty over immortality, the power to grant salvation. So the God has a supreme power. It has given birth to the each and every constituent of the universe. In one verse, it is said, Chandrama manasah jataha chaksho suryah ajayata. Moon is born of his mind. That means moon was born from the mind of the God. The sun is born of his eyes. The sun was born from the eyes of the God. So that way, while continuing to define God, this verse says, what is the duty, what the God did while creating this universe? What was the purpose of creation? That was Tasmat Yajyat Sarvabhuta Sambritam Prashadajyam Tasmat Yajyat Sarvabhuta Richah Samani Jajjire. Everything that is offered in yajna. What is offered in yajna? If we take the symbolic yajna of fire, we offer grains, we offer herbs, we offer pure ghee, etc. These are all produced by that Purusha. That means whatever we are utilizing is produced by Purusha, and that all things, all material, all objects we are utilizing for that yajna, it means to give it back to the Purusha. So, taking this as a theme of our life, whatever we are doing must go to that God. One verse before I switch on to the main verses of the Rig Veda, I remember another verse of Athar Veda which says, Priyam ma kranu deveshu. Let me be loved by divine people. Priyam rajasu ma kranu. let me be loved by the kings. Priyam sarvasya pashyata, let me be loved by all. Ut Shudra, Ut Arya, let me be loved by the down level people, that means lower mind people and the higher minds people. So the answer is, if you want to be loved by the divine people, suppose if I want to be loved by some saint, I must give respect and love to that saint, only then he will love me. If I want to be loved by the king, I must give equal respect and lot of love to that king, so that that king may also love me. If I want to be loved by the people, I must also love all the people. If I want to be loved by the Shudra and Aryas, everyone, I must love all these people together. So the theme is, whatever you wish, you give it to others. Now, reverting back to the Purush Sukta, the 11th verse says, Yat Purusham Vyadadhu Kitidha Vyakalpayan. In how many ways or forms do sages visualize that Purusha? If you ask 100 people what is God, all the 100 people will define God and will elaborate God in their different mind setups. Then the question is raised, Mukham kimasya ko bahu ka uru pada uchete. That means, what is his mouth? What is the mouth of God? Now, can you say that God, everyone knows that God is not a person sitting at a place. God is away from Jati, Desh, Kal. God is pervading the whole universe, but the God has not created any one particular body for himself. So how this question was raised? What is his mouth? That means, what is his mouth? How God speaks to us? What are his arms? Where are the arms of God? How he will love us? How he will protect us from these arms? What is his stomach? How he will fill our stomach? Unless he realizes there is hunger in his stomach, he cannot fill our stomach. What are his feet? So when this question was raised, and the next verse, next Ved mantra answers these questions. So the question is raised on an imagination, and questioning in imagination and seeking answer also in imagination. But the answer is particular so far as the attributes of God are concerned. So now, referring to the attributes of God, how many workings of God are there? All those workings are classified into four categories. Brahmanasya mukhamasit. Brahma is his mouth. That means the mouth of God is like a Brahmana. So that is just defined. That is just categorized. The powers of God are categorized. Bahu Rajanya Krita. Kshatriya is his arms. Urutat Asya Yat Vaishya. Vaishya is like his thighs, like his stomach. Padabhyam Shudra Ajayata. Shudra is born from his legs. So now, whether if God is a body, and if I say that I love God, can I say that I love the head of the God, not the legs of the God? Can I say that I love the arms of the God, not the stomach of the God? If I love a particular body, I love that body in totality. I love the feet as much as I love the mind, as much as I love the head. I love the stomach as much as I love the arms. So when you love a body, you cannot discriminate between the different organs. You love your heart and you don't love your liver. You love your stomach, but you don't love your kidney. You cannot distinguish like this. This is a simple proposition established by Rig Veda. If you want to know God, you will have to know God in totality. Brahmana is the part of God. Kshatriya is the part of God. Vaishya is the part of God. And Shudra is also equally important, the part of God. Now our social thinkers, now our seers came up with these four words. These are the four words which we have assumed as the personality of God It is just an assumption. And the Vedas have given this assumption. So why not to classify the society into these four parts? So they took these four words, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, to classify the attributes of human beings. Whatever you want to do in life, you do it either as a Brahmana or as a Kshatriya or as a Vaishya or as a Shudra. But you are equally the part of the society, equally important. Discrimination was never there anywhere in Vedas, which says, Priyamma Kranav Deveshu, let me be loved by all. And the answer is, if you want to be loved by all, you will have to love all. If the Brahman wants to be respected by all, he will have to respect all. Brahman cannot be respected if it disregards a Shudra. And Shudra cannot command any blessings from Brahmana if it disrespects a Brahmana. So this is a simple proposition. Vedas are very clear. The question is, after the medieval period, when the invasions were there, that period of about 2000 years, in that period, the Jnana Parampara was stopped. People stopped studying Vedas. And moreover, this is a Kali Yuga. So people are more crazy about their cravings, their taste of tongue, and their filling up of stomach. They are running after materials, but they are not caring to have a communion with the giver. People want objects, but they do not want the giver of those objects. So the only lack is, in my view, this is the lack of spirituality in today's society. If the people start loving God, I am sure they will love God in totality. When they love God, they will love people. And when they love people, they will love their own self. If I do not love people, it means I am not loving my own self. As Bhattji was referring to the Advaita philosophy, if the Advaita philosophy says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma. So equally important is to realize that every other person is a Brahma. So that way, we cannot discriminate, we cannot allow this discrimination. Now coming directly to the problem aspect of the misinterpretation given to these four words. These four words were rightly implemented, rightly taken by the society as the order of the society, because these are the four attributes of God. So seers and saints and rishis advised people to follow these attributes in their own life. Till that it was right. But when discrimination started, the whole problem started. So now we'll have to refer to the solution aspect. In short, the solution is just have a look into the lives and workings of all reformers during the last century or during the last to last century, 19th century, 20th century, and 21st century, even today. The foremost is Guru Nanak Dev Ji. All 10 gurus. The Sikhism was a revolt against the caste system, the misuse of caste. Then the Arya Samaj in North. It started from Bombay, Maharashtra, and it spread to the whole of North and even in the South also. And then in South also, we have so many reformists, Tiruvalluvar, and so many other people. All refer to the reforms, and in the name of reforms, their first attack was to stop the misuse of this caste system. Do not discriminate anyone because he is doing one or the other job. Every job is important because we require in the society all jobs to be performed by different people. So my suggestion is, when Arya Samaj, when Swami Dayananda Ji referred to the abolition of this caste system, he suggested that marriages should take place according to the gun, karma and swabhav of the two, bride and groom. And what is happening today? Today in government level, we see no forms or no requirement anywhere which requires you to fill up your caste. Even what is happening in love marriages. When a girl and a boy meet together, they have some equality in their mind, they develop some love in between them, they go for marriage. They do not ask in the first instance, what is your caste? So I do not want to say that disregard your parents. Let there be arranged marriages, let there be love marriages, whatever is there, but there must be a unity of mind between the bride and the groom, not the unity of caste. I have 2 daughters. I have given those 2 daughters just matching their gun karma swabhav to different castes. I have never followed my own caste because I do not feel that by caste, if I am a Kshatriya, and even by profession, I was a lawyer. I am a lawyer. My caste was my caste was the caste of a Kshatriya to protect the people from injustices. So now, for the last about 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years, I have given I was given an opportunity by God to enter into the scriptures, to enter into the meditative life, and to enter into the health aspect of the human beings. So people are coming to me for consulting their mental problems, their physical problems. So I have become a health consultant.
Shankaracharya, his research and studies in Shankaracharya's philosophy, spirituality, and the books he has written, all these are very new perceptions is given to us, especially Indian spirituality, Indian philosophy. His service is tremendous. I invite Professor Gautam Patel to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Gopinath ji. Thank you very much, Gopinath. I am highly impressed. Thankful to all of you, especially you and Batsa, as well as Janak Bhai, who gave me this opportunity. Can you hear me? Dhanveen? Nathi aaparta koi. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed. Yeah, we can hear you. Please proceed. We can hear you.
All right. So, Professor Bhatt has touched each and every corner of the problem, past and present. So I have nothing to add much. Brahmanasya mukhamasit from Veda, Rigved 10, 9, 12, Yajurved 31, 11, Atharvaved 1966, and so on. But and as it is already pointed out by Vimalji, that Priyam Makrunu Deveshu, Priyam Rajasu Makunu, that means for a Vedic seer, Uta Shudre, Uta Arya, either Shudra or Arya, all are equal in his sight. My friend defined Shuna Shepa, Shuna Langula, Shuna Prucha, such names which belong to the lower caste, and they are the Vedic seers. Vishwamitra, he was Rajarshi and then became Brahmarshi also. What to tell? Vyasa, what was his caste? He was the son of a fisherwoman. And what he gave us. So in ancient time, this was not like that. Actually speaking, to my mind, this Varna Pratha which has come. But let me make it clear first that Varna and Jati, as Professor Dave has already pointed out, that even Orientalists are confused between these two words, Varna and Jati. But this Varna Pratha came, according to me, on the most scientific base. First base was heredity, and second was environment. Today we say DNA, the DNA of a father, and it matches with the son. So heredity, Brahman, son becomes Brahmin because he has an atmosphere in the home that daily Agnihotra is there and so on. So Brahmin becomes Brahmin. Kshatriya son becomes Kshatriya because he finds weapons all around, right from his birth. And his father doing all this. So this has come as a heredity that is one in blood, and at the same time, environment. You know, even today, it is believed and experienced that a father has a diabetes, the son gets even after 50 years or 60 years. That means basically when the system came into existence, these two were major principles involved in it: heredity and environment. Gita is often referred, but I would like to add something more, and that is this. After giving Gunakarma Vibhagasha and what Brahmin Kshatriya is, Gita says, Swaswa Karmanyabhirata Samsiddhim Labhate Nara. Brahma in his own action and Kshatriya in his own action or Shudra in his own action, in karma, he is Abhirata. He has love. And that from all the side, Abhi means from all the side he has love. That means he follows it properly. He attains the highest siddhi in his life. And he says, Yatak pravrutti bhutanam, yena sarvamidam tatam, tat swakarmana tam abhyarcha siddhim bindati mayana. Swakarma, one's own action. That is, Brahmin follows his own duty, Kshatriya his own duty, or Shudra in his own duty. Not only that, a great life, and by that he reaches to the highest. What Brahmin attains by practicing yajna, Shudra attains the same thing by serving the others in society. That is what Gita says. And not only that, but a good license is given that nobody would find in any religion of the world. And he says, Gita says, Sahajam karma kaunteya sadosham api natyaje. Kaunteya, oh Arjuna, your sahaja karma. Sahaja karma means janmana saha jatam karma sahaja karma. I am born as a Kshatriya, I must perform it. I am born as a Brahmin. Say for an example, I am born as a fisherman. Now, Gita says, your sahaja karma is sadosham, is full of dosha. Still, you not give up. You should not give up. If, say for an example, all the fishermen in the world gave up their duty of killing fishes and they say, no, it involves violence, we won't do it, then not possible. So this license is given. If a farmer plows in the field and he says some insects are dead and so there is a violence, so I'm not going to plow from tomorrow. No, even if there is a dosha, in action, you must follow it. And that is what Gita has said. Swakarmana tamabhyarcha siddhim vindati manava. And there he said, sarvarambhahi doshena gune, doshena dhumen agni vritya. As like a fire is covered by the smoke, all the actions in the world, they involve one way or the other any dosha. See, action is like a coin. It has both the sides, king and cross, good and bad. In Nyaya, it is said system, pravartana lakshana doshaha. What is dosha? Pravartana lakshana. The moment you start acting, the dosh is going to be there. So give up your dosh, find out your own action, which is sahaja, for which you are born, and then go ahead. And that is what Gita is insisted about this varna and this. One thing is certain, that where Guna Karma Vibhagasha, it was in the beginning. And later on in Mahabharata, we find some references that if a Brahman boy is in the womb of a mother, he should be respected. That means it came to Jati. Here I am reminded of a nice instance. I am reminded of a nice instance that Shivaji, you know, he conquered right from Maharashtra up to Gwalior. And then he appointed 4 Suba, Gayakwad, Shinde, and others. Now, when they were appointed according to, according to their merits. But later on, they started becoming hereditary. Son of a Gayakwad became the Gayakwad next, and so on. So that means same thing happened in this good system. Shivaji started with a good view, and then later on it became with a birth. Similarly, here also Brahman became Purohit. He wanted his son to be Purohit. So he started this birth, and then all this that we don't expect has also come here. I tell you, otherwise, how it is in deeply it is spell out. Only one instance, because it's a very vast subject. In Bhagavad, it is said how Brahmin should live. Ruta amrutabhyam jiveta mrutena prabhrutena cha satya nrutabhyam jiveta savritya katha vrachana. By Ruta he should live. By Amruta he should live. By Mruta he should live. And by Prabhuta he should live. I explained what he has said. Rutam Uchchilanam.
As Sir Kumar Mitra says, in typical Aurobindo style, that there's this cosmic urge towards a higher evolutionary achievement. And we have to contribute whatever we can under the circumstances we are placed, and towards an ushering in of a better day and a greater light. So he says that the wisdom of the ancients, you may call them sages, seers, scientists, or whatever, was that they contemplated a system of introducing the same perfection into the social order by bringing together, various parts or endowments of personalities into an ordered system. I just mentioned Sankhya. Purush is supposed to be, it's a classic example. Purush is supposed to be like a lame person, who can see. Prakriti is supposed to be like a blind person who can walk. So they go into that metaphor that suppose the person who can see but has no legs sits upon the shoulders of the person who cannot see but has legs. Then there is an appearance of a complete ability to reach this destination. So he says, as no man is complete, no man is wholly spiritual, no man is wholly intellectual, wholly rational, or wholly emotional. Therefore, this necessity, I think, to bring together all these various particles. What does the Varna system mean, actually? Everyone mentioned it. There's a very interesting take. He says it does not mean color. It actually doesn't, everyone refers to it in one way or the other, but it may not actually mean color in a grammatical sense. It means the color which is philosophically or metaphysically attributed to the gunas of Prakriti. So, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. I think Bhatt Sahib will bear me out that these three properties of Prakriti are the basis or the substratum of what are known as the colors. It obviously does not refer to the color of the skin, as is wrongly thought sometimes. It is the color of the value, in a particular individual. How much Sattva or how much Rajas or how much Tamas is there in an individual. So no one is wholly Sattvic, no one is wholly Tamasic, no one is wholly Rajasic. There is some percentage of each guna in different individuals. So I think because of this kind of notion, I think the Varna system came about. I think all of us know this. I was just adding a philosophical dimension to it. And of course, because of that, I think we also had this system of administration, system of social order, system of social organization. But then I think this is just a philosophical gloss. But again, I come back to the reality. The reality, there is no solution. There is no sustained solution in sight. The only perhaps way out is that maybe the government itself needs to think about this. But then again, if the government thinks about it, it will be considered an imposition. So I think so many reformers have come, so many sages have come. If you look at the Bhakti, Bhakti movement in the 15th and 16th century, you look at, people quoted from the Upanishad. Satyakam was quoted. It strikes me as very strange that despite what reformers are saying, despite what sages are saying, I think a man like Vivekananda, forgotten, actually, in practical terms, forgotten. I mean, he's only meant to be remembered once a year, and to be celebrated as National Youth Day. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that when we've developed this kind of a social setup, it is an aberration. Beautifully put by Gopinathji. I think it's an aberration, but the way out, perhaps, I think I have great faith in the younger generation. I think technology was felt to be a great leveler. Maybe it is, maybe not, but I just quoted, I've seen, batchmates, I've seen, people from IIMs going abroad. And then again, you come back to, your caste. Somebody asked me, I didn't know what my caste is. So I was quite surprised. I mean, that, with all of this, educational backup which we've had, we've not changed our mind. I think whatever our parents have told us or our grandparents have told us, I think we've been free souls. I think that's the spirit of inquiry which kind of circumscribes the Upanishads. I think we need to get back to that. And maybe the social order will work itself out. As I just said, I have great faith in the younger generation. I think it's only the younger generation which can cast away this mindset that, I'm a Brahmin or I'm a Kshatriya or I'm such or I'm such, because till we don't get away from the categorizations, till we do not get away from this particular mindset, there is no way, I think, any society can progress. That's all. I don't know the way. I mean, I'm in the government, but yeah, as I said, if you issue a government order, it's considered an imposition. And obviously, I'm just joking. I mean, you can't possibly do that. But I'm just saying that, I find it strange that despite hundreds of reformers and sages in this country, we've not been able to change such a small thing like that. I mean, a lot of people defend it. Even I defend it. I mean, I just defended it. But the fact is that I know at the end of the day, the common man does not understand the philosophical implications of the Varna system. The common man is worried about, whether his daughter is getting married to the right caste. He's worried about, whether his standing in society is in the right caste. He's not worried. He's not worried about philosophy, although he should be, but that's a separate matter. But, those day-to-day problems, that the existential problems somebody mentioned, I think those govern our thinking and our status in society, because status somehow matters a lot for us. So I won't go into the fact that this concept has been distorted and whatever. It may have been distorted, but the fact is that we seem to be perpetuating it, and I think that's a sign of worry and a cause for concern. I'll close with that, Gopinathji. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pranav Kullarji, and your elevated view and vision. It is what we could learn, because being a civil service officer in the higher echelons of Government of India, you are opened to the reality in society. That is why your faith in the younger generation, because they alone can break this chain. Absolutely. This vicious circle, they alone can change. As Ambedkar has rightly pointed out, as you said in his essay or in his, so these tasks are assigned in caste. We find that, and he says that this industrialization, economic development, will loosen the rigidity of caste system. He visualized, but it is partly we are witnessing such a phenomena, such a situation we are finding or we are witnessing. It is all right, but as you said, that perfect vision of life, as that your mentor, you referred to, and that perfect vision of life, one is supposed to cultivate in one's life. That raising of consciousness into higher levels, that alone can get one out of such situations, absolutely, such rigid social formations in which one is embedded. Only through raising the consciousness, imparting true knowledge. That is the relevance of Vedic wisdom also.
Yes.
Vedic wisdom, we don't take in a textual way. Veda is a supreme knowledge that percolates down, that transmits from great gurus from time to time. So long as such a percolates down, it goes down, this land will not die. Now even today we witness such great seers in this land, great gurus, and due to whose sankalpa this land still continues with its vibrancy, vitality, and dynamism. So you have made us very, knowledgeable and very. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. What's up? Thank you.
Thank you. So may I invite
Just a minute. I am
Dr. KR's permission.
I am hopeful that with the further advancement of science and technology, the younger generation will do away with the caste system.
Absolutely.
And a time will come that this sort of social stratification will be done away with. So
I hope so.
Yeah.
And,
But they need guidance. This younger generation, while we open avenues for advancement in science, technology, modern knowledge systems, there also we need to provide them guidance. They
don't bother for this caste system.
To all people.
They don't need any guidance. Automatically, their mindset has changed.
No, I don't think so, sir.
In Japan,
Had it been the case. Your guidance, Bhatsar knows better than we. Guidance, without guidance, nothing will come out. Goodness will not come out.
Yeah.
Each and every stage of one's life, if proper guidance is not given. See, the whole Western society, they have wealth, technology, science, and everything, but they terribly like guidance. They don't know where to go, how to proceed. So, because we are not going, because we have inherited guidance in our genes.
Mhm.
Being a person born in this land, we have some inherited the values embedded in our soul or jiva. Therefore, with folded hands, I say guidance is always needed in each and every phase of my life. Otherwise, our rationality, intelligence will take away from. Always the propensity is to go with the bad, negative things. So, as you teachers, Professor Bhatsar teachers, we need guidance. We have to give guidance to our younger generations. Then, with all these facilities, they will go higher and higher. They will break these things. It is my humble opinion to put it with your opinion. So thank you. So may I invite because our Bhakta, Dr. Bhakta Niskama Shanda, he has to join another meeting at 6:45. Therefore, may I invite Dr. Bhakta Niskama Shanda Swamiji. He belongs to, we all know that he belongs to Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute in Bangalore. It's a very known Guru Parampara. They frequently, every day they organize programs on vital issues, on science, spirituality, technology, everything. Every day they have program. So let me invite Dr. Bhakta Niskama Shanda to make his presentation.
he is not visible. Is he there?
Sometimes he must have left because 6:45 he has another program. I hope so. Maybe because of that he might have left. I think after his program, I will call him over phone, and after by the end of this program he may join us. I hope so. So in that case, may I invite Dr. KRS Nair to make his presentation. In the beginning also, I introduced KRS Nair because he's an ardent devotee of Navjyoti Sri Karunagara Guru. He stays in the premise of Shantigiri Ashram, and he was a top officer in SBI, and he's a trainer. He's a very trainer. His 2 books recently published in Amazon were best sellers.
Can you all hear me?
I on my record.
Hello? Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
Swamiji, are you back?
Yes.
Yeah.
The sound was not coming.
Okay. Then after Swamiji, we will come to Dr. Nair. Please. Swamiji,
Can you all hear me? The
Yeah,
sound?
yeah, we hear you. But we can't-
Yeah.
we
Can you share my presentation, please?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you very much. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayati giri jatkripa tamaham bande Sri Guru Janatarinam Omagyanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jaina Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. I offer my humble Dandvat Pranam to all my gurus, and thank you very much to all the organizers, especially Dr. Gopinath ji and Professor Bhatt, and all the esteemed participant in this webinar, very interesting webinar. So actually I was having some problem with the audio and video on Google Meet. I hope it is working now well. So I'm going to talk something on difference between Asur Varnashram or casteism and Daiva Varnashram, godly socio-religious society. So generally, the conception of, body is very much prominent in, pseudo-religious and, also you can say so-called advanced scientific education. People are, giving so much importance to body and bodily identity, and they've forgotten about their real identity as something eternal and having some relationship with, the original source, absolute, which is much beyond even the subtle body, not even gross body, the mind, intelligence, and the false ego, even beyond that. So can I see this next slide, please? So actually in pseudo-religious practices and this mundane educational system, we do not give so much emphasis about identity and purpose. What is our identity and what is the real purpose in life actually? So we are just going on purposeless atoms or molecules, machines which don't have their own purpose, inherent purpose. The purpose is imposed. So the question, who am I? What is the purpose of my existence? All those things are not discussed, and most of the time they are spending time on false identity and having goals that are not really meant for the very important opportunity in the form of human life that they have been given. Next slide, please. So, in modern educational system, we came to know about, our origin, it's from some atoms and molecules, and following some random mutation, natural selection from, purposeless atoms and molecules, all life forms manifested by some accidents, actually. So accidents are being given as the cause of our origin. So thus, the purpose and identity, all those things are being eliminated in our educational system from very childhood actually. But in our Gurukul system, from the very beginning, the identity is being emphasized. What is your identity? Are you this body? Are you this mind, intellect? All those things are being first, very seriously inquiry is being, created in the younger minds. But that is almost lost because of this type of misconception which is being taught on the name of advanced scientific education. Next slide, please. So we have concepts like Big Bang hypothesis and abiology, where life came from non-life matter. So some explosion that has produced entire universe, the order that we are seeing. So in such a concept of reality, then of course the identity and purpose introduction is very, very difficult. and they don't have any empirical evidence to justify these all hypotheses, and yet we are being following that on the name of advanced scientific research. And thus modern science also gives much emphasis to bodily identity, and this webinar is also discussing about casteism, which is based on bodily conception of self. Next. So when we are thinking we are atoms and molecules, then we really don't know how the purposeless chemicals without having any intelligence can decide so precisely when and where certain organ or certain things that has to develop when organism is growing, because we don't have any such intelligence in the chemicals when they get apparently seeing as growing, but they don't decide when and where things has to happen. But in the living organism, even in a single cell, when and where things has to happen, that is very, very important. Next. So basically what is empirically observable, that life is coming from life, against that concept, we are being taught that life came from non-life, even though we don't have any evidence of producing even a single blade of grass or a cell from laboratory chemicals. Cell always come from cell, and life always come from life. But somehow we are being educated against what is being observed based on this materialistic vision in modern science. Next. So now the concept of machine, the information-based machine, that is being introduced to understand life, where people are thinking that, like one of the scholars were presenting some time back from Gujarat, he was saying about DNA. So DNA has all the information for all our activities, including what you are going to choose to speak in this meeting. All personality aspect, the personality traits, the thinking that is being determined by DNA, and you can control by the computer program manipulation in the machine. Similar way, you can control the living organism, as if they're thinking that our karma can be controlled by manipulating the DNA. But it is not possible, and this is being well established after the debunking of central dogma, where Crick, one of the famous scientists with Watson, they have explained about double helix structure of DNA, and they were telling that there is some information molecule and there